Well, hello, a very warm welcome to you all. James here once again, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to run double sprockets on your Sturmey Archer Hub gear. So this is by no means a new way of running a hub gear. Many years ago, two companies, Cyclo and Benelux, produced a suitable sprocket carrier for a double sprocket setup on a Sturmey Archer Hub, and this essentially was just like a sleeve that fits onto the Sturmey Archer sprocket carrier, and I believe this used 1/8 sprockets, so you would keep the rest of your transmission, albeit adding a derailleur and probably a slightly longer chain, and with a suitable gear changer this made for quite an easy conversion for anybody to do. And of course it meant you could keep your original back wheel. This was quite obviously fairly popular with cycle tourists for the added gear range that this offered without too much expense or alteration to the bicycle. So using hub gears has remained popular really right up until today, really, for some people, although once the derailleur gear became more commonplace, people did go over to that more often than not. So occasionally in my time, once I started to get into cycling, I would see these sort of classic bikes with these conversions on, and so it was always interesting to me. I have very fond memories of a bicycle that my father had, which was a Polish Universal 20-inch folder. Now this was much modified for sort of all kinds of different uses, but the main thing was it had the Cyclo converter on its back wheel. So with the 6-speed, this bicycle was extremely usable, and Dad covered many miles on that bike. The first time I actually converted a wheel in this way for my purposes was when I had an old 1980s rally frame that I built up into sort of an all-purpose general use sort of bicycle. I'd always had in mind using an old 3-speed Sturmey hub in the back wheel. So I then, having ran that for a while and having had the bike built up, sought to investigate how I could go about converting to the double sprockets on the back. So this is when I learnt about the dished 3/32 sprockets that are available, and this is, say, one of the easiest ways to carry out a conversion. And as I say, I put this in place and had great results. I should like to emphasize that the Sturmey Archer hubs that I'm talking about in this video are most likely all pre-1990, so obviously steel bodied, and this is either a 4 or 3 speed. These are what I've mostly converted. So let's say you have your pre-90s Sturmey Archer hub, maybe a 3-speed or a 4-speed, and perhaps that might be in either a 26-inch wheel or a 24-inch wheel. Now, for the purposes of using dual sprockets in these applications, there isn't such a limiting factor in terms of the size of the sprocket i.e. the number of teeth it has and the ratios that we can achieve with those. With smaller wheels, obviously we need to run either a larger chain set or we need to use smaller sprockets. In any case, available to us from Sturmey Archer down to 17 or 16 teeth, I believe, we have these 3 32nd dished sprockets. So here I have a 17 tooth and a 22 tooth. Now if we put these two sprockets together with the dishes opposing, something like that, this is how it will mount onto the Sturmey Archer sprocket carrier on the hub, and you can see that this will give us our spacing for the 3 32nd chain. So we need to remove the snap ring to enable us to remove the sprocket, and this can be quite awkward, but generally you can use the tabs here and a very small screwdriver and just gently prise away. Keep your hands really clear from it and just gently prise that up there. And that should ping off like so. Put that to one side and keep it safe. So on this particular hub, see we have a spacer. Put that to one side. Now we have our sprocket. We can see that this is the dished variety, but yeah, always worth hanging on to, but we can put that to one side for now. We seem to have another spacer. This is fairly normal. And last of all, we should have the dust cap. And it's important, if you're starting from sort of here with nothing on there, that you do put this back on. It keeps all the sort of grit and grime out. So there we are. That is now stripped down and ready for our next selection of sprockets. So to assemble our two standard 3 32nd dished Sturmey Archer sprockets onto the hub, we first need to make sure that the dust cap is in place. And we need to take our sprockets and make sure that we have the dished sections opposing each other, giving us our chain gap, and essentially the larger sprocket will be dished in towards the spokes and the outer sprocket will be dished out from the larger sprocket. And then we have our little snap ring, which can be a little tricky at times. There we go. So the standard 3 32nd dished Sturmey Archer sprockets are available in tooth sizes, I believe, from 24 down to, I think, 18 or 19 at the moment. Sometimes if you look scour the internet, you might be able to find some smaller sizes. So this just about covers doing a conversion on larger wheels, because obviously typically they don't require such small sprockets as a smaller size wheel might do. So this is something to consider. So during many years of involvement with molten bicycles, I was always aware that people were using the 2-speed conversion on the early bikes with the wide range 4-speed hub that many of the early models were fitted with. So I was always keen to have a go for myself at some stage, and this is what led me to investigate further. So after speaking to a few people and doing some further research, it became apparent that to get a good range of sprocket sizes for doing a 2-speed conversion, the best way to do this is in fact with a slight modification to a Shimano or similar type cassette sprocket. Most commonly used, I think, is like a Hyperglide basic cassette block. So this is a way of having the choice to use the smaller sprockets that these cassettes have, right down to certainly 12 or 11 teeth, should you want to go as high as that. So here we have a rather grubby 7-speed cassette as removed from a hub, and you'll have your lock ring, and you'll find that the first couple of sprockets will be separate from the rest of the block, and these are very useful. We can put those into service, and you'll see I've already started to take this apart, and you can see you have 3 rivets going around the centre, and they go all the way through. And I've started to take this apart, and have to grind out the ends of the rivets at the back. Doesn't matter which side you do this. I've generally always done it from the back, and actually without too much persuasion your sprockets will start to come off, and this is the largest sprocket, and you'll have a spacer between the sprockets here. Now at this point, once you've got enough out, there's probably enough to grab those and try and work them free so that the rest of the sprockets come apart. You could try punching them through, but you might need to just clean up where you've trimmed those back so they come out a little bit easier. But I'm going to do that and then show you what we end up with. So here we are. We have all our lovely sprockets all taken apart. You'll generally find that they'll all want a good clean, but this is what we're aiming for. You can see here the rivets that came out, and you'll have these spacers, as I said. They may or may not come in handy, but as I say, the main thing we need is these lovely sprockets. And as I say, this gives you plenty of choice, depending on your application, as to how extreme you want to go. So here we have a 13-tooth sprocket from the cassette, and this is what I'm interested in using for this demonstration. And you can see that it has its own sort of shoulder or spacer, and this is where the smaller sprockets differ slightly from the bigger ones. The bigger ones have a separate spacer, which is used to keep them at the right distance between each other on the block. And so we can use this in this application and obviously this will face inwards towards the spokes when it's applied. And if I place the Sturmey Archer sprocket on top and just rotate that round a bit, as I do that, you can quite clearly see that the little splines or tabs here do in fact line up. And although obviously the Shimano splines are a slightly different contour, they're not too difficult to alter. And so for our purposes, the splines in between, say here and here, and here and here, are not needed, and so they need to be just ground down, really, using either a multi-tool, perhaps, you know, a rotary tool, or half round file or a round file. So it's quite useful here at this stage to mark off the tabs that you definitely want to keep, just to give you a guidance. So here we are. You can see I've marked up the splines that I want to keep, and so the rest around here in between all need to be taken back, and this needs to be done so that they're all flush with this lower section here, and this will ensure that it will fit onto the Sturmey Archer sprocket carrier. So this is how the sprocket looks after a little bit of fettling and filing, and you can see that our little tabs here that we marked up are still in place, and all I've done really is to re-contour them, to narrow them down a little bit. The Sturmey Archer sprocket tabs are rounded, but these will never be quite the same, but as long as you make sure that you take the corners off, you should find that this will fit and locate quite happily. And obviously when you are filing or trimming, try and make sure that all this edge here between the tabs is all flush and back to a single line. I could probably take a little bit more off this one here, for example, but that should be fine. So much the same as when we assembled the hub with the standard Sturmey sprockets before. We need to make sure that everything's nice and clean, and the first thing to go on is, of course, the dust cap. This I have thoroughly cleaned. It's actually fairly common for there to be quite a lot of grime and muck in there, even though it's supposed to keep it out. It does find its way in eventually, and likewise with this top side. So we can pop that on there. So the first sprocket on I've got is a 21 tooth, which I've worked on. There we are. So this has some writing here, and you can see these ramps that help the chain move over the sprocket when it's part of a block. But anyway, these need to be assembled facing outwards for this application. So next up we have an original Sturmey spacer. And again, this has been well cleaned up. So that goes on next. And now we can put on our small 13 tooth sprocket that has also been modified. And as I showed you before, this has the spacer incorporated as part of the back of the sprocket, and this obviously goes in towards the hub, and you can see that it has these serrations also on the outside, so you know that that's the right orientation. Taking another standard sprocket, I'm just going to pop that on top like so, and I'm just going to get a rubber mallet and give that a bit of a tap, just gently. Just to make sure that everything is thoroughly seated. Shouldn't really need to do that, but it just is belt and braces really, just to make sure it is all sitting where it needs to be. And so now we can install our snap ring. There we are. So at this point I'd just recommend that you take your mallet again and a small screwdriver and just give the snap ring a little bit of a tap, just to make sure that it is fully seated in its groove. So with your sprockets mounted, you'll be looking to put this in the bike and see how it looks, and then see about locating a suitable derailleur and seeing how this fits on your fork end. Now I'm just going to show you on this pair of molten forks here and go through a few things to consider when you're mounting a derailleur. Obviously this is most commonly going to be on a bike that doesn't have a derailleur hanger already. So this old Heuret derailleur has its own hanger attached, so this makes this really very ideal. So if this wasn't the case and you had a derailleur without, then hangers are quite readily available, and as far as I'm aware they don't come up too thick. The good thing about these Heuret ones is they're really quite skinny, and so this is good because it takes less space up on the threads of the Sturmey axle. So of course this locates on here, and normally to retain this on the back side is a small threaded collar, if you will, that sort of locates in the dropout here. Now I don't tend to use those. I find that they bring the gear hanger too far forward, and so therefore you end up with not enough axle in the dropout, which is something you definitely want to avoid. So the way around that in my case here with these forks is, as you can see, I've been able to get the hanger back a little bit more by putting a small hole in the very end there, and just getting that mounted up, and really just putting a little nut and bolt in there, and that is, let's get that mounted up properly so you can see. Anyway, something like that. But this is more than enough to secure the derailleur, and in any case, once the axle nuts are done up, this secures everything in place anyway. So it really is just to retain the derailleur whilst you're working on the wheel, perhaps taking it out to mend a puncture or something like that. So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything you need to know there. As I say, this is quite a nice example of something that would work quite nicely. The drop of the mechanism here is not too much, and in my particular application on the Molten, this is very important because obviously we're talking 16-inch wheels, and I don't really want this dragging on the ground. So this, you know, is pretty good. I have used one of these for trialing purposes and it was okay, but I ended up actually in the end going for something a little different, and an even shorter caged Shimano item from the sort of early 90s. And I say this was nice and compact and left me plenty of clearance. So that was ideal. So whilst you're looking at different derailleurs and deciding which one best suits your application, something very important to consider is the limit screws. To set your high and low stop for the travel of the derailleur. Now, you're going to have a very limited section of travel, obviously over just 2 sprockets, but it's no different to any other derailleur system, whereby once you've achieved the selection of the sprocket you want, you really want that derailleur to not go any further. So in order to achieve that, because it is such a short throw, it may be necessary to swap out the screws for longer ones. Sometimes it's just one side is required, just depends on how the setup is finally. And yeah, so that's quite important. And it can be a little tricky to find suitable replacements, but it's well worth it because it's so nice. Obviously this is a friction system, and you don't really want to have to be overly careful when you change. You just want to be able to change up or down and not think about it, and have the derailleur stop where it needs to keep a good smooth transition. So yeah, that's well worth bearing in mind. So as regards to gear shifting, this is down to personal preference really. This may be a down tube shifter, or it could be some sort of a friction shifter mounted on your handlebar or on the stem even. But generally speaking, a fairly simple setup. 2 things to consider would be whether you're going to have an entirely enclosed gear cable, i.e. one that has the outer sleeve running all the way along its length with a stop at the shifter all the way through to the changer, or are you going to use suitable cable stops that you add to a frame? These are available in various places, so you can play about with those and have a section of bare cable as you would on most sort of classic derailleur geared bicycles. And that's not to say that your bike may already have suitable stops for a rear changer if you're using a bicycle that originally came with a derailleur system. So this is how I did my original conversion. As the bike had been previously a 10-speed, I was able to use the original cable stops. So at this point, that's pretty much everything you need to get up and running, and with a bit of sort of further tinkering and adjustment, you should be running along fairly smoothly with your double sprockets installed. Now, it goes without saying that I'm telling you this all from my experiences of what I've done, and I've obviously modified manufactured parts. So it goes without saying that this is obviously done at your own risk. But I would add that on the Molten, the conversion I did has been installed now for, well, it's probably approaching at least 1,000 miles worth of riding over the past couple of years or so. And it has thrown up no issues whatsoever. Everything has stayed in place. It just works really well. So I would not have recommended this if there had been any issues with it. So I hope that you found this helpful, and well done if you got to the end, because it's quite a technical thing to explain and go through, but I hope I've managed to convey the major steps to achieve what we're setting out to do. So a big thanks to all viewers and subscribers, and I shall wish you all the best and see you again soon. Cheerio.